Well, good morning. We're live with the Ovadia Heart Health live stream. And it is a real honor for me today to have Frédéric Leroy. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
More or less.
More or
You
less.
pronounce it actually the French way, so it would be
The
Leroy.
French way. Okay.
Well, that's fine.
As our illustrious guest here this morning, and we've got lots to talk about. But before we get into that, we do have to do one housekeeping chore here, and that is this live stream, as well as any of our Ovadia Heart Health live stream, is not, I'll repeat, is not personal medical health advice. If you are looking for personal information or would like to work with Dr. Ovadia, please reach out to team at ifixhearts.com. Again, this is not medical information. This is intended purely for information, inspiration, and we hope lots of food for thought here this morning. So welcome, Frédéric.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure. Now, I'm sure there are many listening who already are familiar with your work, but we just might have a whole contingent that is not. So, can you give us the brief overview of what you're doing currently, what your work is, and actually where you are? Not everyone knows that we're speaking with someone across the ocean this morning.
Right. So I'm based in Brussels, Belgium, and I'm a professor at the at Brussels University. And my background is rather complicated. It's various things coming together. I have a nutritional background to a certain degree. I have also a bit of an bioengineering background. I worked a lot on fermentation of foods, and I developed a special interest in animal source foods. And I'm trying to bring all those things together also by working together with people from completely different disciplines and moving into the interdisciplinary space and working on the, dealing with the entire very polarized debate around meat and animal source foods with respect to health, environment, ethics, and trying to bring more, sense and evidence-based elements into that discussion, because very often it's a very emotional discussion, as we all know. And it also tends to become very hyperbolic or very reductionist or exaggerated. I'm trying to keep it more closer to the evidence and also opening it up to new perspectives and addressing all of its different dimensions.
Fascinating. And yes, we have that polarized community surrounding the topic of meat here in the US as well. So let's dive right in. What do you feel are some of the most, let's just say, the top of the misconceptions around the meat conversation? What do you think that people do not really understand in terms of the data, whether that be about life cycle processes or other elements that you're trying to help enlighten people on understanding better?
Yeah, well, that's a whole discussion, of course. It's a
Yes.
lot of things to talk about, and that's the problem with this debate, especially, is that it quickly escalates into in a very complex story with lots of different sides and different side discussions. So it's very difficult to keep that contained. But mostly, I think the problem is that we are not respecting fully enough the complexities of animal farming or farming in general. That's one thing, and how that is something that comes with context-dependent limitations and real-life kind of problems and complexities. But that's also valid in the health space. So even in the health and nutrition narratives, we tend to become very simplistic in the way we approach it. And so I've been busy trying to get that complex discussion towards a more simplified story, but it's very hard to even begin addressing it, especially in a format like this, because it goes in all directions. So you obviously have discussions around livestock and greenhouse gas emissions. That's a classical one. You have one around biodiversity, and you have talk about food feed competition, land use associated with this. You have water wastage, and how much water is consumed um, by producing food. You have the health discussions around chronic disease, but you also have the health discussions around nutrient bioavailability. You have the ethical discussions, whether or not it's still allowed or desirable to kill animals. So those are all very, very different elements. And that's why it's so hard also to have the conversation, because very usually you have someone with a certain expertise in one of those dimensions, but not having the insights into the other aspects that you also have to bring in once you start designing policies, or once you start coming up with specific advice. So we could pick any of those and go in more detail, but in general, I think my message would always be that reality is the real situation out there is much more complex than the simplified slogan-esque approaches you'll find either in policy documents, in media, or even in a lot of academic papers.
And I love that you mentioned so many different topics there. And I would highly encourage our audience to go look at a lot of the papers. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you have over 185 peer-reviewed publications with your name on that, to look at either the Dublin Declaration for more of that work. That would be would that be a good starting point, Frédéric, for individuals?
Yeah, well, more than the papers, I think, which tend to be technical. The Dublin Declaration initiative is um, an attempt to have that broader debate. So that has been an initiative that came up. We got together with a number of people being concerned about how this conversation is just out of touch, and we said, okay, we have to do something about it, and have a more evidence-based discussion. And we call that the Dublin Initiative, because we organized a conference in Dublin, and it came with a declaration as well. And the declaration, maybe I can just present what this is about, so people understand what this is about.
That would be helpful.
So the declaration is a manifesto. It's a very short document. You'll find it online. You can read it, and it doesn't say all that much. It just says, be careful if you start vilifying livestock, because we absolutely need livestock in the food system. We probably have to change the way we're doing it, and we probably have to change that quite radically. We have to do very, we have to redesign a lot of that current system to make it more sustainable. But be careful when you start vilifying livestock, because it comes with a lot of benefits, and just we would be lost without it. So any radical statement that would say, look, we have to get rid of livestock, or we have to reduce our consumption of meat with 90%, or you name it, we've seen a lot of those, is very dangerous. And that's what the manifesto is saying. It's important for health, it's important for environment, and it's part of our societal setup, and we cannot do without it. So that document has been signed off by, I think today it's around 1,200 plus scientists worldwide that have signed up to this declaration. And we're trying to create critical mass, because we felt that in the academic discussions, the anti-livestock voices became way too prominent, and the counter voices were hardly visible, especially if you go to documents that also influence policies, like the Eat Lancet report and all of those. So we come up with a different story, and we're trying to get a broader conversation. So for the first time, we organized a conference that is addressing all of those different topics I mentioned before. The environmental pillar, we have a health and nutrition pillar, and we have a societal / ethics / economical pillar in that discussion as well. We invite experts, we have special issues connected to this, where we address all those difficult conversations. So the Dublin Declaration, you'll find it on the internet. You also find lots of links to different papers that are connected to the initiative. You find links to videos of people presenting their points of view, and a lot more.
Fantastic. And I want to definitely come back to, there's so many things we could talk about this morning, but we only have this short hour here, or close, or just under that. To address right away here, we're going to come back to the bioavailability and nutrition piece, which is a lot of questions that we've received already prior to our meeting here. But we have some wonderful questions coming in here. Audrey Deerham, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Do you feel like fermented vegetables are healthier? Is it important or necessary to add them to a diet? I've been carnivore for 2.5 years. Would you like to address that one?
Well, I tend to be a maximalist, and I'm on the rather libertarian side. So I hate to dictate people what they have to eat. I just try to lay out the boundaries of the human diet, which comes with the discussions around evolutionary diets and so forth. But I'm hesitant to become very specific, because I think the evidence we have in the nutritional space is just too limited. So I tend to leave it as flexible as people like it, unless, of course, you come to situations, and that's probably a lot of the work you're facing, where people have become metabolically compromised, have developed insulin resistance, and you name it. And in that case, the flexibility it becomes more restricted, and probably more therapeutic ways to dietary interventions are needed. But if someone is healthy, I think we don't have to insist all that much on the specificities. There are many different ways for human beings to be healthy on a wide variety of foods. And the boundaries I would draw is that just stay away from those diets that are clearly dominated by ultra processed foods. I mean, that's clear. The Western type ultra processed diets that are based on the refined carbs, the sugars, the refined oils, and the concoctions that have been created to be as addictive as possible. Stay away from those, clearly. And then for the rest, focus as much as you can on nutrient-dense foods of all different sorts. And depending on your own personal needs, because I think we tend to forget often that people are very different. Some people will do much better on very plant-dominated diets than other people, just because of the genetic machinery and the metabolic machinery that's inside the body, and allows people to convert precursors into active molecules and so forth. So some people, like the person asking the question, have decided to follow a carnivore diet for whatever reason. It could be because maybe they're trying to fix intestinal issues or certain metabolic problems, and for many people that seems to be a good solution. Some people are quite strict and would stay on the carnivore diet. Others take it more loosely and would also combine it with different foods. Fermented vegetables have been mentioned. I think fermented vegetables are great, but it all depends on how you react to those, how much you like them, because that's also something we tend to forget. Food is also something that we have to kind of enjoy. And so there are many different factors, that person would have to decide upon herself. But in general, fermented vegetables are a way of processing vegetables that is benign for a number of reasons. As much as I'm hesitant to, how would I say, as much as I'm harsh on the ultra processed side of the food chain, as much I'm very as much I'm very welcoming and favorable for the benign types of processing. So since the earliest days of our time on Earth, we've been processing foods, meat particularly in the very first eras, because of the fact that it was one of our staple foods. But as we started to include all sorts of different foods in our diets, especially during the Mesolithic times, we came up with all those different ways of treating plant materials, because plant materials very often can be toxic. They can be hard to digest. They can they can have nutrients trapped inside their structures that are less bioavailable, and they can also sometimes be very perishable, so very vulnerable to spoilage. So depending on the plant food, but fermentation has been introduced to stabilize those, to make them more digestible, to make them more nutritious, to make them more nourishing. So it's a great technology.
Yeah.
And fermented vegetables are an example of that.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great food, but again, depends how much you like it.
Absolutely. And food is meant to be social and enjoyed. And
Right.
this falls in line very much. We see the carnivore diet as a real elimination diet. If you've got
Yes.
underlying issues, whether it's insulin resistance, autoimmune diseases, it is one way to really go to the very basics. And then maybe as you get healthier and you progress, you might start adding certain things in that you like or that seem to be appropriate to work for you. We also say it's one diet fits one person, and you have to find the mix that works for you. For any of our listeners, I would add here, if you are purchasing fermented foods, particularly fermented vegetables in the USA, make sure they're in the refrigerated section of your grocery store and that they are naturally fermented, that they are not just fermented with vinegar and sitting on the inner shelves of your grocery store. That's an important feature that some people don't realize, that if they're truly authentically fermented, then that must be refrigerated in your grocery store. We've got a couple other questions. Larry, I'm not sure where Larry Diamond is. One, he says, here, Frédéric is correct. I did a political ecology and geography to be a polymath in this area. Fred Provenson, nourishment. And Frédéric has 2 polymaths. So great job. Congratulations. You've got a fan there in Larry. He also says that you're wonderfully polite, Frédéric. Well, it takes all of us in the conversation, but Larry, we're really thankful you're in the conversation. And we hope to encourage by this live stream today even more of this on these various areas on the topic of meat, livestock, and just global nutrition. So let's go back a little bit to the bioavailability in nutrition. Something that we say that plant and animal protein are not one-to-one. Could you enlighten our listeners, as myself as well, on how you approach this conversation?
Yeah. So my advice always tends to be focus on those foods that are nutrient dense, and that will also keep you away from all the other stuff. So both plants and animal foods can be nutrient dense. Animal foods tend to be very nutrient dense, and they also contain a lot of nutrients that are today problematic already. We do have widespread deficiencies globally, but we also have them in Western countries. And a lot of those deficiencies are actually fixable through animal source foods because they have very high bioavailability. They're packed with specific nutrients with high bioavailability that can address a couple of those deficiencies. And so can some plant foods that are nutrient dense, like leafy vegetables and so on. Now, the discussion sometimes goes very much into the direction of protein, and protein is used as a to designate or to point towards specific foods. It's important to remember that food is more than that nutrition is more than protein, right? We tend to use protein as a kind of denominator or kind of a referral for a much complexer nutritional package. So that's a dangerous thing because we become focused on the protein. Plant proteins in general tend to be of lower quality, which means that they are less digestible. So there's more work needed. That's, again, we come back to fermentation. So as a way of making it more accessible, but there's more work needed to get to the amino acids, and the amino acids are less aligned with what our body requires. So they tend to be of lower quality. Soy is pretty good. Cereals are terrible. Legumes are somewhere in the middle. You can mix those and have complementary profiles, and then you get closer. But animal source foods are a great way to obtain protein. And protein is a cornerstone of a nourishing diet. I mean, if we don't have enough protein, we don't get the satiety coming in. We absolutely need our daily influx of protein, just for the maintenance of our bodies. It's an extremely important nutrient, but it's not the only one. Okay. So we also know that because of all the other nutrients that are associated with the proteinaceous foods, that consuming a certain minimal amount of animal source foods and protein, animal protein, if you wish, is kind of a buffer, a kind of a guarantee that you're also bringing in the other ones. So it has been estimated that if you roughly have a 50-50 animal protein, plant protein doses, you probably cover a lot of the micronutrients as well. If you go below 50% of animal protein, that's where they want to push us with the protein shift. They want to go below the 50%. Now we have more or less 60, at least in Europe, 60% animal protein, 40% plant protein. They want to reverse that. So then you're crossing that critical threshold where you start endangering a couple of micronutrients as well, thinking about zinc and B12 and vitamin D potentially, iron potentially. So those are also affected. So summing up, plant and animal proteins have different qualities. You can get there with plant proteins as well, but you probably need more bulk. You need more calories to get to the same dose. So it's just very convenient to bring them in by animal foods. But it's very important to know that the proteinaceous foods are also having all those other micronutrients that you will neglect if you just focus on protein.
Well, great and very, very clear for our audience. And I will remind you, keep posting your questions. And Anders says, thank you for answering my question. Definitely, if you'd like to know more about the Ovadia Heart Health team, and specifically our employee wellness programs, here's the link right in front of you. Again, we're bringing metabolic health focused programs to the workplace, very different than your standard disease management programs, of which they've been historically. You can also download a case study of one of our companies that we are working with in Pennsylvania, a manufacturing factory in Hanover, Pennsylvania, where we're now on year 3 with them. So we're seeing wonderful progress there. Let me go back to just a little point you made about this 50-50 threshold. Could you talk a little bit, Frédéric, about also the cumulative effect on the individual potentially with this, let's say, going to more of a 60-40, maybe even 70-30? And I'm going to throw in a disclaimer here. I was a vegetarian for 20 years until I started having some very serious health issues, which the medical system, I spent about 2 years in the Netherlands trying to figure out what was wrong with me, until a dear friend said, well, have you ever thought about your diet? And then I went down that rabbit hole of, well, maybe my 20-year adventure was no longer working for me. So do you see in the research, is there data? Okay, I have an anecdotal and is one story here. It's not a story, though, that I haven't heard via clients or other individuals of attempting to do something very restrictive for a long period of time, the health consequences. Is there data behind this?
So you're asking if there's a temporal effect, if you stick to that specific dose, let's say a 50-50, if on the longer term you would see some things coming up if you stretch that long enough over time. Well, potentially yes, because some of the nutrients do show that time effect because they get stored in the body and the stores can get depleted. B12 is a typical example. So people on vegan diets, they may go well for a certain amount of time, but then suddenly the depleted B12 can pop up. You have vitamin A, which is fat soluble and is stored in the fatty environments, but then at some point also needs to be refilled from time to time. So over time, yes, you can see an aggravation of certain micronutrient deficiencies if the buffering of the body, the kind of storage capacity we have, gets slowly depleted over time. So we do have anecdotal evidence. It's difficult to get those things in hard scientific literature because it's very hard to document that. And and there's so much confounding taking place of all sorts of different factors. But we do have at least anecdotal data that people indeed seem to do well on vegan diets, and at some point in time they just drop off because sometimes very suddenly health issues start appearing that like almost a certain limit has been reached, and then it breaks down. Yes.
And on these individuals, we encounter many individuals who, and I don't know how in Belgium currently the medical system is dealing with lifestyle components and health in general. For instance, again, that was some time ago that I was in the Netherlands, but it happens here in the US that people, the medical system never even ask them about what are they eating, what is their nutrition, what are other, what are you doing in terms of movement, how's your stress level, how's your family and support system. Is that similar in Europe currently?
I think that's a global problem, that there is very little nutritional awareness within the medical community. There also probably lack the training to be receptive to the lifestyle effects. And they may ask you about stress levels if you have high blood pressure. I mean, you have those simplified associations they have, but the broader context of how everything falls in place is often not very well addressed. Not because they're bad intention, they haven't had the training for this, and they've been trained in therapeutic reactions, right? You have a problem, you have a disease, let's medicate it. But the preventive side of things, of course, is arguably more important than fixing the broken machines. And we see too little of that, absolutely.
And that is definitely, we have a very pill, surgery, medical solution orientated system, which many of us sadly call it a sick care system, not a healthcare system. We're trying to change that at the Ovadia Heart Health, both with our employee wellness programs, if you want to find out more about those, as well as with our telemedicine practice. And again, I want to remind also our listeners, if you'd like to see more of Frédéric's research, what he's doing, you can both look at that Dublin Declaration, I believe .org website. And I believe we had another link. I'm not sure, I didn't write that down, where you can be reached here, lf2020.org. Speaking of this difference between Europe and the US, and by the way, I do Ik heb Heimwee for those of you who, for the Netherlands, a little bit in Belgium as well. Are there any ways that the US and Europe could better partner on some of these issues from your perspective?
Yeah, I suppose it's just that we're living in a very fragmented world where we have all sorts of different agendas and geopolitical situations and hostility, and that doesn't make it easier. But essentially, we could benefit from collaboration. It's just that a lot of the potential official collaboration is outsourced to transnational levels. You get the World Health Organization, you get all of those, but the actual grassroots systems where the real improvements are seen. We have movements that are re-embracing the value of nourishing food. That comes very often bottom up. It's people discovering how they're able to fix their metabolic issues through eating in specific ways, and discovering those nourishing ways of eating. Those things are grassroots movements very often, because of the fact that, as you said before, the medical view is one that is trapped in that specific paradigm. So if would be a way of linking up those grassroots movements, that would be a big step forward. So now recently in the States, I've been asked to join an expert panel on something called the Metabolic Health Coalition.
Yes.
So that's one initiative. You have your initiative, right? You have a lot of those, actually. And if we could build bridges between those communities, that would be fantastic. Now, because the conversation is today not one where you can isolate health and nutrition from all the other things, because we talk about food systems and dietary transitions, you also have the environmental stories. So I think it's important that we create links across the ocean, but also within our respective countries, between the nutrition people and the agricultural people and the environmental people, so that we can find common ways to get to better nourishing scenarios. And with nourishment, I always try to insist that nourishment is more than just bringing in micronutrients and protein fractions in our bodies. It's also nourishing the soil, it's sourcing your foods from sound food systems that are respectful of the environment, that create biodiversity, and creating a long-term vision. How can we nourish ourselves, ecosystems, and communities as well? As you mentioned, social aspects of eating. How can we get all of that in place? And that's a bigger challenge. And the problem is, if you're trying to create transnational or international collaborations, you're very often facing diversities that are difficult sometimes to harmonize. Just the fact that you have to produce it in completely different soils and within different climates, within different cultures, with specific receptiveness or taboos around certain foods. People are very, very different from place to place, and the ways we can produce food also differ quite a bit. So that is standing in the way, I think, of a one size solution. So I'm all for collaboration, but sometimes it's difficult because it's so context dependent. We also face different challenges in a country like, I don't know, take Italy, which has a very different food culture versus the United States with its own specific challenges. Those are not the same. They're not facing the same problems, right? So it's great to collaborate, but it's not always easy.
Yep, absolutely. And wonderful that you're participating in the Metabolic Health Coalition. That's exciting to see that collaboration happening. A little bit the same question. Obviously, we have a personal investment. We have two factions to our business at Ovadia Heart Health. We have our telemedicine practice, and we have our employee wellness programs. It has taken within the programs we're working some time to just help build the knowledge base amongst individuals about the nutritional benefits of a meat-based diet, because the plant-based advocates have a much larger voice. They have, in many ways, taken over the conversation, particularly in the US with the Lifestyle Medicine Organization and various other very prominent figures in that. What would be some, maybe we call it low-hanging fruit in the US, that either companies or, sort of groups of people, maybe even churches, what tools or where would you sort of point them in the direction to start helping that educational process?
I think by making it much more practical and less abstract, because what we're hearing, so the information we're getting, especially from the plant-based folks, is all about healthy diet, right? It's like eat a healthy diet, and then the concept of healthiness doesn't mean much anymore. They fill it in with very specific ideas, so it's all about fiber-rich, low-fat. So they kind of capitalized, or they kind of hijacked the terminology, and now healthy diet is a very narrow view on what actually a good human appropriate diet would look like. So I think that any organization wishing to change that paradigm needs to work on that concept. That's why I usually avoid to talk about, maybe you've heard it in my choice of words during this conversation, I try to avoid the word healthiness, and I try to bring it back to nourishment. I think this is really where the breakthrough is. If we can communicate through different channels that we should start nourishing ourselves again properly, adequately, that is the main message, because it's a much richer concept. I think we just need to make this conversation around diet richer, and with richer I mean that it's more multidimensional. It's about all those different things that I've tried to mention in the previous minutes, making it a richer, more human conversation and less a medicalized, narrowed down reference to abstractions like healthy diets. right? So making it practical. When you make it more practical, it implies that it's about the food, about the dishes, about the diversity of dishes, about people sharing food. It's about feeling that's, that to be exposed to that feeling of satiety, and feeling nourished. Uh, Once you start experiencing those things, I think you're paving the way to a better dietary scenario. Um, Getting rid of the old-fashioned paradigms that are stuck turning in circles and haven't improved anything, if not have made things worse. Which also implies that the fact that the way we communicate dietary advice, the way we construct dietary guidelines, the way we talk about those things officially top down from governmental perspectives, but also then being used by industries, that's not working. It's clearly not working.
And I'm going to hijack your word for as we move on after this conversation of nourishment. And I think just as a sort of highlight to any employers listening or people in a company is start, advocating in your place of work or workshop or wherever you are about this idea of nourishment. How are we nourishing ourselves? So what are we offering in terms of nourishment in the break room? But also the broader conversation, as you mentioned, nourishing the soul. Soil, oh, I had a Freudian slip there, but also our soul.
Both, yeah.
Both together. Just as a little anecdote, I think one of the first things that I was impressed upon when I moved from New York City to the Netherlands was just the amount of time people took with a dinner. Everything in New York City is about fast and quick and, what can I get on the go? And then even some simple things as I was a professional dancer for 30 plus years. And that's why it took me to the Netherlands was the first thing what we would do when we would come to the studio prior to working out, rehearsing, is have a cup of coffee together. And in New York City, that was unheard of, right? To take minutes to socialize when you're supposed to be working. And I think some of those little things that we could share internationally, a little more embrace to enjoy, whether it's a coffee or a meal, something together that we often miss here in the US.
And I think there's a metaphor also in here. So in a way that food is information in many ways. So it's information because whatever you're eating, you're sensing it all the time. You're trying to figure out what value is in that food for your body. So you're trying to tasting it, you're smelling it. Even if you ingest it, you're still tasting it. You have all sorts of receptors all over the digestive tract, trying to sense what you're getting in, right? That's probably where ultra-processed foods are messing up because they give you wrong information, and the body just gets confused because of all this artificial flavors, all the information is becoming detached from the actual value of the food. And if food is indeed information, then the stories we need to tell again need to become richer. So you can have narrow stories, like very one-dimensional stories. You bring in a nutrient, you digest it, and end of the story. Or you can have a richer vocabulary, which means a richer vocabulary of nutrients, a richer vocabulary of ways to talk about food, a richer vocabulary of again, within the body, within the metabolism, dealing with all those signals rather than the very simplified ones where you have energy coming in, just like empty calories hitting the brain and then giving you the feeling of energy. And no, you need the satiety mechanisms in place, and that's when that only works when you have a rich enough conversation. And I mean that metaphorically, I mean that literally as well, in the body physiologically, but I also mean it metaphorically, because if you deal with food in a richer way through commensality, through valuing the way you source the food, the way you share the food, all that richness can only help in also translating into a richer physiological response, which I think is important, because the information we're sending to our bodies, if imagine you're on a daily routine of sourcing your food from I don't know, corner shop. You're taking it in your car. You're eating a sandwich with almost no nutrition inside, drinking a soda next to it. That's a very poor story. It's a poor narrative, biologically and even culturally. That's not good for you. It's the richer conversations of molecules and words and symbols that I think are the ones we need to find again. I know it sounds maybe a bit fuzzy and a bit maybe overly romantic, but I honestly think that's the way we have to tackle this. Get away from the narrow views, the linear, one-dimensional, myopic approaches to what it means to have food.
Absolutely. Wholeheartedly embrace that. And again, if you're joining us late, if you want to know more about Frédéric's work in Brussels or Bruxelles, if you're from the other side of the water, please reach out to him. And we've got the Dublin Declaration link here. As we start sort of getting closer towards our time here, are there any particular things that we haven't mentioned that you feel are really pertinent and lacking in the conversation these days on either side of the aisle, whether in Europe or here in the US?
Well, a lot, but I think that there's we also need to make it. We need to address the fact that the animals we have in the food system are not only there to give us food; they do many other things as well. They are important for a number of reasons, and that's something we also need to talk about, because we again we would reduce that conversation to the fact that those bring us food, and if we take them out, we'll have to source our food somewhere else. We get it from plants, we get it from labs, we get it from bioreactors, whatever, and that's the end of the story. No, the animals are there for many other reasons as well. And in Europe, for instance, we have countrysides that are now places like Spain. You have countrysides being emptied, or people are just moving away, and that has partly to do with the fact that traditional ways of agriculture are disappearing. Agriculture is kind of also cementing communal structures in Europe. Animals in the food system will help you to maintain certain ecosystems. They provide what we say technically, or we define technically as ecosystem services. That doesn't say much, but essentially those animals are helping you to fertilize the soils, help you to keep the chain of life intact, where you have all sorts of cycles going on, and you can bring in the biodiversity a certain ecosystem needs. If it's well done. If it's badly done, it's very destructive for an ecosystem. But if you use your animals in according to agroecological principles, you're creating a lot of benefits to ecosystems. And if we just take out all the animals, well, then we will have a completely different world, and it will be much more problematic than people sometimes assume. So I think we need to have discussions also on what animals mean beyond food for us. We don't hear all that much about it. Usually it's seen as a bad thing, because they put out emissions, and then they overgraze, which is true to a certain degree. But on the other hand, we also need them, and that discussion, I think, is something that people cannot really place well, because they haven't been exposed to it. They don't actually see it in practice. They do see the foods, but they don't see how the animals operate within, especially ruminants, how they shape also ecosystems, and human communities, how animal foods also contribute to livelihoods worldwide. Especially in low-income countries, often they're one of the only ways that females can actually get income and build their own identities and lives through the keeping of animals. So all those aspects, I think, also worth talking about much more than we're currently doing, because that's behind the scenes very often.
And it is a conversation you would hear rarely here in the United States.
But
And
even in
again,
Europe.
That's my opinion. I don't have actual numbers to put on that, but it is, understanding the diversity that animals can bring to a community. I was just in the Midwest traveling for the U.S., and what do you no longer see lots of land with animals on it. You see rows and rows of corn and soybeans. And that's very different than when I grew up there. And I know I still have family and friends in the Netherlands. You hear a lot about many farmers are disappearing in the Netherlands. I know they've made it extremely difficult for them. I don't know what the situation is in Belgium, but we're narrowing our field of availability in terms of animals quite small, it seems like.
Yes, there's a lot of pressure in Europe. The pressure is enormous. We see that in the UK, we see it in the Netherlands, we do see it in Belgium, but we see it all over the place. Farmers are stepping out because of the fact that either they're pushed out or they're bought out. The government buys them out, so they give them money to stop. They're discouraged. They have paperwork. They have all sorts of extra things they have to deal with. Economically, it's difficult. They're getting vilified. They don't get the respect they deserve. It's a tough job to be a farmer. So the risk is that those farmers are just going to quit. There will be no follow-up in the next generations. And once you lose them, it's not going to be easy to put them back at some point. So which means that especially for Europe, we will become increasingly dependent on import from other places, where you don't have control over the production systems all that much, and you create dependency and fragilities in, if supply chains are at some point compromised, whether that's because of a pandemic or whatever you can imagine, or a geopolitical situation, it's a very fragile situation. So food security is becoming increasingly a form of anxiety within European circles because of the fact that policy has been pushing out traditional farming from our food systems.
And I think this is happening also here in the US in various different geographic areas. However, today we tried to change that conversation to broaden the knowledge base. Once again, I want to tell, if you want to reach out to us about our employee wellness programs, you can do that. Again, we're trying to change the narrative around all things nourishing. And you can also reach out to Frédéric. Any closing thoughts? And I'm extremely honored you wanted to join us here today. Followed your work for many years here from abroad. Any last thoughts, Frédéric?
No, well, okay. We had a very, high level kind of dialogue exchange. We don't get. It's not a place to get very granular. Just that if people are interested in very specific elements, feel free to contact me. You'll find a lot of information on the Aleph link you just shared a moment ago. This Aleph 2020 website. People can contact me if they have questions about specific elements, whether it has to do with environmental aspects, with the nutritional aspects. You can follow my Twitter line. There's a place for this as well, but I think today, it's great to hear that you're trying to create change. We do need it, and the change has to drive us away from that overly medicalizing worldview that we are now facing, and essentially is not solving the problem. We have increasing numbers of metabolic diseased people. If we don't have a new way of dealing with this, we're lost. I mean, it's going to become so expensive to society. Not even talking about the human misery it creates, but it's going to become so expensive to society that things will just crash if we don't solve it. So it's becoming more urgent with the month. And it's only through, again, coming back to what I said before, through initiatives like yours and similar ones that we can try to change it. I think grassroots, bottom up is the way to deal with it, because we don't have to expect much from top down. Right? I know you have this new administration that is very atypical. It's not clear what it will bring, but that's probably it's more the exception than the rule. Usually, the top down attempts we've been seeing over the last decades haven't done much, to be kind.
We're firm believers in it starts, one person, one meal, maybe one company trying to make some change. And
Yes.
while we're very thankful that there is conversation from our administration about topics like metabolic health and food sources, we're very, very thankful. Our 50-year experiment of the low-fat diet, for lack of a better word, dogma, we could say we've done that experiment. Can we move on and broaden the conversation?
Try something else, maybe.
Let's try something else, right? It's the epitome of insanity, doing the same thing and expecting different results.
It's actually worse than that, Krista, because we're kind of doubling down on it. That's the problem. So we've had that first, attempt of making things more healthy. Put in fiber, put in low fat, put in all that, and we're kind of doubling down on it. We haven't reduced saturated fat enough. Well, we have to put more fiber. We have to put more. Yes, let's maybe try something else.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great note to leave on. And you are absolutely right. We just we scratched the surface, as we say here in the US. But still, we hope we've, encouraged some conversation. I see some thoughts in there. Thank you for having this conversation. And we are super appreciative of your work. Very excited to hear you're working with the metabolic health. Are they calling themselves association or is it summit? Coalition.
I'm very new.
Yeah.
So I'm just one of the experts on the side. I'm not in any way driving this thing or putting down the lines of the strategies. I'm just associated with it to a minor degree. But I think, and I mentioned it mostly because I think it's one of it's a manifestation of change. It's an example of it's showing that change is needed and probably coming. I mean, I'm still optimistic. I think it's coming. I think it will change, and I think it will be for the best of all of us.
Absolutely. Well, once again, Frédéric, thank you so much for joining us here. And I encourage everyone to see what he's doing, get involved, read some papers, have some conversations, and start to change the way we approach nourishing ourselves as well as our friends and family.
Thank you for having me.
Ja, heel erg bedankt. En voor alle Nederlanders en ook mensen in België bedankt.
Dag. Bye bye.